You've done the responsible thing. You sat down with a spreadsheet, added up every essential bill, multiplied by 6, or maybe 12, and parked the cash in a savings account. You feel safer. You feel like a grown-up with a plan. Here's the part most people never calculate. That same safety can quietly subtract 6 figures from your future net worth. The paradox is simple. The bigger your emergency fund grows past a certain point, the more it can slow the wealth you're trying to protect. Before we run the numbers, let's put everyone on the same field. So the math is apples to apples. We'll use figures that match what a lot of American men in their 30s, 40s, and 50s are actually living with. Essential monthly expenses, $34,800 for 6 months. That's $5,800 a month. That is not luxury living. It covers housing, food, transportation, insurance, and the basics for a middle to upper middle household. 12 months of the same expenses, $69,600. Inflation. We'll use 2.7%. The Consumer Price Index rise from December 2024 to December 2025. National Average Savings Account Rate, 0.38% AP. That is the FDIC National Deposit Rate for savings as of June 2026. Top high-yield savings accounts, around 4.15% APY as of mid-2026. Long-term stock market assumption, 10% nominal average annual return for a broad U.S. equity index like the S&P 500, and about 7% after inflation. And one more reality check. According to Bankrate's 2026 Emergency Savings Report, only about 27% of Americans have enough savings to cover 6 months of expenses. And nearly 1 in 4 have no emergency savings at all. If you've already built a solid cash cushion, you're ahead of most people. That is not the problem. The problem is what happens after the cushion is already thick enough. So what does conventional wisdom tell you to do? It says, build 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash. Then, if you can, push it to 9 or 12 months. Keep it liquid, keep it safe, don't invest it. Don't touch it unless the roof caves in or the job disappears. That advice is not stupid. It comes from real pain. Loss aversion, the tendency to feel the pain of a loss roughly twice as strongly as the pleasure of an equivalent gain, is hardwired. A job loss or a medical bill that forces you onto a credit card at 20+% interest feels catastrophic. Cash that is sitting there, ready, removes that fear. You sleep better. You negotiate harder at work because you're not one paycheck from panic. You avoid the high-interest debt spiral that destroys more wealth than almost any other single mistake. Present bias, our tendency to overweight immediate comfort over distant outcomes, also pulls you toward a bigger cash pile. The peace of mind is today. The opportunity cost is abstract and years away. Mental accounting, the habit of treating money differently depending on which mental bucket we put it in, seals the deal. Once you label a balance emergency fund, it feels sacred. Adding another $10,000 or $20,000 to that bucket feels like progress. Moving any of it into an investment account feels like risking the family's safety. Financial gurus, bank ads, and well-meaning relatives all reinforce the same message: more cash equals more security. After the inflation spike of the early 2020s and the soft labor market, many households still feel that message lands even harder. 54% of Americans say inflation has caused them to save less for emergencies. So when someone finally gets ahead and can pad the fund past 6 months, it feels like winning. If you have 12 months of expenses in the bank, you are doing what every responsible checklist told you to do. You are not reckless. You are not behind. You are following the conventional playbook that has protected millions of households from disaster. Here's what changes the whole calculation. A bigger emergency fund past a true safety threshold does not just sit there neutrally. It actively trades future compounding for present calm, and the price of that trade is measurable in dollars. Layer 1. Inflation is a silent tax on every idle dollar. At 2.7% inflation, $34,800 of excess cash. The second 6 months on top of a solid first 6. Loses about $940 of purchasing power in the first year alone. Over 10 years, that same pile keeps its face value but buys only about $26,600 of today's goods if it earns nothing. Even in a top high-yield savings account at 4.15%, your real return, after 2.7% inflation, is only about 1.45%. You are not losing ground fast, but you are barely walking. In a traditional big bank savings account, at the national average of 0.38%, your real return is negative 2.32%. Every year that money is losing ground. Layer 2. Opportunity cost is the real bill. Take that same $34,800 of excess cash. Money you already have beyond a 6-month essential expense cushion. And compare 3 homes for it. Left in a big bank savings account that's 0.38% for 20 years, roughly $37,500. Invested in a broad U.S. equity index earning a historical-style 10% nominal annual return for 20 years, about $234,000. The gap between the high-yield savings path and the equity path on that single excess slice is approximately $156,000 over 20 years. Against the big bank path, the gap approaches $197,000. That is not a stock tip. That is the cost of labeling too many dollars untouchable after your true emergency need is already covered. Layer 3. The behavioral trap of over-saving cash. Once the emergency fund becomes a status symbol of responsibility, many men in their 30s to 50s keep feeding it. $500 a month that could go into a taxable brokerage or retirement account instead pads an already adequate cash reserve. $500 a month for 20 years, a high-yield savings account grows to roughly $185,000. The same $500 a month earning a long-run equity-style 10% grows to roughly $359,000. The difference is about $174,000. Most people miss this because the emergency fund feels finished only when the number looks large. The real math shows that finished should be defined by risk coverage, not by a round multiple of expenses that keeps climbing. Layer 4. Liquidity theater. Not every dollar in a 12-month fund needs to be available in 24 hours. A job loss rarely requires writing a check for 6 full months of expenses on day 1. You typically have severance, unemployment insurance, a partner's income, or the ability to cut discretionary spending. Keeping 3 to 6 months in pure cash and another layer in a short-term treasury or high-yield vehicle that is still accessible within days or weeks often covers the same real risk with far less cash drag. The conventional choice looked right because it maximized calm. The hidden cost is that calm, past a point, is purchased with decades of compounding you never get back. Let's turn the small decision into a life trajectory. Same household. Same $5,800 of essential monthly expenses, 2 paths. TAFE, the conventional oversized fund, $69,600, a full 12 months. Parked in a high-yield savings account at 4.15%. No further additions to this pile. We just let it sit so we can isolate the effect of the excess cash. TAF B. The calibrated fund, $34,800, 6 months, in the same high-yield savings account. The other $34,800 is invested in a broad U.S. equity index. Assuming a long-run 10% nominal annual return. Same total starting capital, different home for the second half. Checkpoint, 5 years. TAF total, about $85,300. TAF B total, about $98,700. Difference, roughly $13,400 already in TAF B's favor. In real purchasing power after 2.7% inflation, TAF B is still ahead by a clear margin. Checkpoint, 10 years. TAF A, about $104,500. TAF B, about $142,500. Gap, roughly $38,000. That is more than a full extra year of essential expenses, created purely by where the second 6 months lived. Checkpoint, 20 years. TAF A, about $157,000. TAF B, about $312,600. Gap, approximately $156,000. At this stage, the difference is no longer a rounding error. It is a meaningful slice of a retirement nest egg. A house payoff, or years of flexible work options. Checkpoint, 25 years, roughly the horizon for a man who is 40 today and planning to age 65. TAF A, about $192,000. TAF B, about $473,000. Gap, roughly $181,000. Now run the harsher, a common version, the same 12-month pile left in a big bank account. At the national average of 0.38% instead of a high-yield account. At 20 years, that pile is only about $75,000. The optimized TAF B is still around $312,600. The gap balloons to roughly $238,000. At 25 years, the gap approaches $397,000. Those numbers assume no additional contributions. In real life, many households keep adding to the cash pile after 6 months is already secure. Every extra $500 month diverted into an already full emergency fund instead of long-term investments compounds the gap further. on the order of $174,000 over 20 years at the rates we used. What does this mean for life trajectory language? At 5 years, you notice a nicer buffer or a slightly earlier ability to take a calculated career risk. At 10 years, you are looking at a meaningful difference in net worth that can change how you negotiate a job, fund a side business, or handle a family transition. At 20 and 25 years, we're looking at a six-figure swing that can mean retiring earlier, carrying less mortgage into your 60s, or simply having more options when health or family needs shift. The small decision, whether the second 6 months of safety sits in cash or in productive assets, becomes a different wealth path. This is not personalized financial advice. Consult a certified financial advisor for your specific situation. Your job stability, health, dependence, dual income status, and access to credit all change the right number for you. Honesty matters here, because credibility is the only real product this channel has. The conventional choice, a larger cash emergency fund, actually wins under specific conditions. It wins if your income is highly variable or commission-based and a 6-month drought is a realistic annual event. It wins if you are the sole earner for a household with young children or high fixed medical costs, and the cost of a forced asset sale in a downturn would be severe. It wins if you are within a few years of a major planned transition, career change, business launch, or early retirement, and you need a known cash runway that cannot fluctuate with markets. It wins if high-interest debt is still present. In that case, every extra dollar should usually attack the debt before it pads a 12-month cash pile or gets invested. It wins if market volatility would cause you to panic sell investments during the exact emergency the cash was meant to cover. Behavioral risk is a real risk. A slightly lower expected return that you can stick with beats a higher theoretical return you abandon at the bottom. For everyone else, dual income households with stable W-2 jobs, manageable fixed costs, no high interest debt, and a time horizon measured in decades. The real math shows that once true short-term risk is covered, additional dollars usually create more wealth in productive assets than in an ever-growing cash bunker. The higher principle is this: safety has a price, and that price should be paid deliberately, not automatically. An emergency fund is insurance, not an investment. You buy enough insurance to survive the storm. You do not keep buying more policies on the same house after the roof is already covered. Then wonder why your long-term wealth looks thinner than it should. Calibrate the cash to the actual risk. Put the rest to work. That is how you protect both your sleep and your future net worth at the same time.